Every weekday morning before the sun touched the rooftop of Jefferson Technical Academy, Walt Jenkins arrived through the back maintenance door. He never clocked in late, never asked for extra hours, never called in sick. He just showed up, mop in hand, keys at his belt, and silence as his usual companion. At 70 years old, Walt had become a quiet fixture of the school. Students passed him in the halls. Teachers nodded out of habit. Most didn't know his last name. To many, he was just the janitor, the one who polished floors, changed light bulbs, and carried a mop like it was an extension of his body. That particular Thursday morning, he was finishing up waxing the main hallway when he rolled his mop cart toward the conference wing. A staff meeting had just ended, and several administrative interns were standing around sipping coffee and chatting about upcoming evaluations. As Walt turned the corner, a floor sign slipped slightly out of place. His mop handle knocked into a chair leg, producing a sharp clack on the freshly cleaned tiles. One of the interns frowned and raised his voice. "Hey, could you not? We've got guests arriving soon. Maybe move that cart out of sight, yeah?" Another one added, laughing under his breath. "It's like he's trying to mess up the floor after he cleaned it." Walt looked up, gave a brief nod, and softly replied, "Sorry about that, gentlemen." His voice was gravelly but calm. He steadied the cart and quietly rolled it to the side. They didn't say thank you. They didn't ask his name. They didn't notice the faint scar running down the side of his neck or the way he still instinctively walked shoulder first around corners, like someone trained to expect danger. To them, he was background noise. A man with gray hair and work gloves. Just another figure blending into the beige walls and shining floors. But to Walt, it was enough. He continued his rounds, wiping tables, emptying bins, fixing the rattling doorstop in room 204. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't trying to be noticed. He believed that some jobs, if done right, are meant to be invisible. In the staff lounge, the interns kept chatting. "I bet he's been doing this his whole life," one said, sipping his coffee. "Probably retired and couldn't afford to stop," another added, casually. Walt didn't hear them this time. He was standing outside in the courtyard, looking at the flag slowly rising in the breeze. He always paused there, right at 7 o'clock a.m. Sharp. Not for show. Not for anyone else. Just a habit. One he hadn't broken since the war. The next day brought more than just a morning staff meeting. It was Prospective Families Day, and the school buzzed with energy. Banners hung in the atrium, cookies laid out on linen-covered tables, and the principal pacing in the lobby rehearsing her welcome speech. Walt arrived, as always, just after 5:30 a.m., and got to work prepping the building. By 7:45, the floors gleamed like glass. He polished the metal door handles with a practiced rhythm. No one noticed, and he didn't expect them to. But as the clock neared 8:15, those same interns from the day before reappeared, this time rushing to arrange chairs in the auditorium. One of them, a tall guy with a blazer slightly too tight, noticed Walt placing new water bottles at the speaker's table. "Hey, janitor man," he called out with a smirk. "Can we get, actual cold water? These are room temp." Walt looked at him calmly. "These are the ones they asked for." The intern rolled his eyes. "Sure. And maybe dust off the podium? Don't want our guests thinking this place is run by geriatrics." A few other staffers nearby chuckled. One mimicked Walt's slow gait behind his back, exaggerating the stiffness in his knees. Another fake whispered, "Bet he was cleaning caves in the 60s. The laughter grew louder. A few turned their phones slightly, pretending to check messages, but actually recording. Walt stood still, his hand resting on the podium he'd just finished wiping clean. He didn't scold, didn't defend himself. Instead, he adjusted the position of the small American flag pin on his work vest and moved on to the next task. Inside the break room, the jokes continued. "I heard he's been here since the Cold War," one intern joked. "Probably thinks he's still in a bunker somewhere," said another. Jamie, the youngest staff assistant, finally spoke up. Guys, come on. He's just doing his job. The tall intern shrugged. Relax, Jamie. He's not even listening. He probably can't hear us anyway. But Walt had heard every word. Not because he was eavesdropping, because he knew that in every building, mockery always echoes in the corners people assume are empty. He didn't react. Instead, he returned to the basement supply room, where a small photo frame sat tucked on the wall just behind the door. No one else ever saw it. But each morning, Walt glanced at it once before grabbing his tools. It was a black and white photo of him, 30 years younger, standing in a dusty uniform in front of a platoon of soldiers, his face unreadable, but his eyes sharp. That afternoon, the school's guest speaker finally arrived, a senior official from the Department of Veterans Affairs. As he walked through the entrance lobby, he paused just a few feet inside, his eyes scanning the banners. Then he stopped. Froze, actually, because just ahead of him, bent over replacing a light bulb, stood a figure he recognized instantly. He whispered under his breath, "Colonel Jenkins?" The words hung in the air, quiet, reverent, like they'd summoned something from history. Walt turned slowly, and the moment their eyes met, everything in the room changed. The silence that followed the VA official's request was thick. A few scattered chuckles from students who still thought it was a joke, but those quickly died down. From the back of the auditorium, Walt stood motionless for a moment. Then he slowly removed his cap, the faded navy blue one with the janitor's insignia stitched on the side, and began walking down the aisle. He didn't stride. He didn't raise his voice or wave to the crowd. He walked like he always did, deliberate, steady, shoulders slightly hunched, but proud. On stage, the VA official held out his hand. Walt shook it, firm grip, and turned to face the room. He didn't take the mic. The official did. For those who don't know, this man spent more than 30 years in uniform. 30 years leading troops, not from behind a desk, but in the dirt, in the heat, with boots on the same ground as the soldiers he commanded. He turned to Walt and nodded once, asking silent permission to continue. Walt gave the faintest smile. This is Colonel Walter H. Jenkins. He led the 12th Infantry Battalion during Operation Iron Dawn, guiding 500 men through 3 weeks of constant fire with 0 casualty due to friendly fire. His leadership record is taught in military colleges. He declined every general's star offered to him because, in his own words, leaders eat last, always have, always will. A stunned murmur rippled through the auditorium. A teacher in the front row blinked as if seeing Walt for the first time. A student whispered, "That guy? No way." But there was no mistaking it. On the projector, the VA official had begun showing photos, grainy images of war zones, military documents, and finally, a photo of a younger Walt in full gear, standing in front of his company. Same eyes, same stance, different uniform. Backstage, Jamie stood just out of sight, her hands clasped tightly. She wasn't surprised, not entirely, but the weight of the truth still hit hard. The man who had helped her mop up a flooded hallway without a word had once given battlefield orders that saved hundreds. Walt finally stepped up to the mic. He didn't clear his throat, didn't rehearse his words, he just spoke. "I never wanted a podium. I always believed you lead by showing up, not by being heard. But if you take anything from me today, let it be this. Don't judge people by what you think they are. Some of the most powerful people you'll ever meet wear no medals on their chest, just calluses on their hands." A long pause. Walt scanned the room. Then he nodded once, more to himself than anyone else, and stepped away from the microphone. And then, it happened. One student stood. Then 2. Then rows upon rows of young people, teachers, parents, rising silently, clapping slowly at first, then louder. Not in that wild, celebratory way you see at sporting events. This was reverent, measured, an ovation not for a speech, but for a life. Even the staff member who had sneered at him earlier now stood awkwardly, his face pale. The VA official turned back to the mic. Today was supposed to be a lesson on leadership. I think you've just met the curriculum. As the applause continued, Walt simply picked up his janitor's cap from the podium and placed it gently back on his head. He gave one final wave, barely a flick of the wrist, then turned to walk off stage, mop cart waiting in the hallway. But everyone who saw him walk away knew. That man didn't carry cleaning supplies. He carried history. The auditorium, now half filled with students, parents, and faculty, buzzed with light conversation and the shuffling of programs. The VA official, still standing in the lobby with Walt, lowered his voice, but couldn't hide the awe. "Sir, if I may, you're Colonel Walter Jenkins, aren't you? 12th Battalion, Northern Province, 1987? Walt gave a slow nod, his tone quiet but firm. "I was. These days I mop floors." The man straightened his blazer, visibly moved. "Sir, you led over 500 men in the Battle of Dactalon. Your tactics are still taught at Fort Benning." "I remember the battle," Walt replied. "I try not to remember the blood." Behind them, a group of students paused, confused by the exchange. Jamie, the assistant who had defended Walt earlier, overheard just enough to put the pieces together. Her eyes widened. A moment later, the principal's voice crackled over the intercom, asking all staff to please take their seats in the auditorium. The guest speaker, the VA official, was now due to take the stage. As he stepped up to the microphone, he held his prepared speech in hand but didn't open it. "Ladies and gentlemen, faculty and future families, I was invited here today to talk about leadership and sacrifice. But the person best equipped to do that isn't me." He turned toward the back of the auditorium, where Walt had just quietly entered through the side door, ready to replace a broken light near the emergency exit. The official's voice rang out again. "Colonel Walter Jenkins, would you mind joining me up here?" The room froze. All heads turned. The janitor? People looked at one another, waiting for someone to correct what they must have misheard. But Walt didn't hesitate. He set down his light bulb, removed his cap, and walked slowly but steadily to the front. The staffers who had mocked him earlier shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jamie glanced at them, her expression unreadable. As Walt stepped onto the stage, the VA official turned to the audience. "This man led 500 soldiers through jungle warfare, outnumbered 3-1. He carried wounded men for miles under fire. He declined every promotion after lieutenant colonel, because he said leaders should walk beside their men, not above them." A ripple of whispers passed through the room. The official continued. "He's decorated with 2 silver stars, a Bronze Star for Valor, and the Distinguished Service Cross. His file is classified in parts, not because of secrecy, but because heroes like him never asked for attention. They just did the work." The tall intern who had filmed Walt's tremors stared at the ground, color drained from his face. Walt finally spoke, his voice even but carrying to the back of the room. "I came here to clean, not to be praised. But I'll say this, don't measure a man by his mop. Some of us used to hold rifles, carry stretchers, or lead teams into places we weren't expected to return from. We don't stop serving. We just serve differently." The audience fell into stunned silence. Then slowly, one student stood, then another. A veteran parent rose, followed by teachers, faculty, and finally even the interns. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a standing ovation from people who had finally seen someone clearly, not for what he did now, but for what he had always stood for. In the weeks that followed, everything at the school felt quieter. Not out of shame, but reverence. Walt, or Colonel Jenkins, as some now respectfully referred to him, continued his janitorial rounds. But now, students opened doors before he reached them. Staff offered him fresh coffee in the mornings, and those who had mocked him never made eye contact, though he never asked them to. The plaque outside the auditorium door changed one morning, quietly, without announcement. Just 6 engraved words on polished brass. Colonel Walter Jenkins, leader in silence. Walt didn't say much when he saw it, just ran a calloused hand over the edge and nodded. One morning, Jamie caught up to him in the hallway. "Sir," she said, "I hope you know that what you said, it stayed with a lot of people." Walt offered a half smile. Words fade. Actions stay. Later that afternoon, during a fire drill, he noticed a group of kids helping a girl in a wheelchair down the ramp. No one had told them to. They just did it. Another time, a student saw him replacing light bulbs in the gym and offered to hold the ladder. No jokes, just instinctive respect. One day, a father stopped him outside the school after pickup. "My son talks about you all the time," he said. "You're the reason he joined ROTC." Walt simply tipped his cap. "Tell him to lead from the front." The tall intern from before, the one who had filmed the mocking video, eventually approached him too. It was during Walt's lunch break in the supply closet. "Sir, I don't expect you to forgive me," the intern said, "but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. My grandfather was a Korean War vet. He passed last year. I think I was trying to forget that because it hurt too much." Walt studied the young man for a moment, then nodded. "Then make him proud with how you walk from here." The intern's eyes welled, but he didn't speak again. Just shook Walt's hand, firmly, like it meant something. And so Walt Jenkins kept moving, mop in one hand, quiet legacy in the other. He never asked to be honored. He just showed up every day, a reminder that true leadership doesn't need a title, just a backbone.
If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored to have you with us. Each day we share quiet moments that remind us what still matters. You can subscribe below to join us.